Hello, welcome to the Resilient Life Hacks podcast today, where we talk about winning at life by building a stronger spirit, soul, and body. I'm your host, Elizabeth Myers, and it's so good to have you here today. I'm super excited about our guest today, Brenna Blaine. She is the host of the Can I Say That podcast, and I've listened to some of her episodes. It's very refreshing, just her honesty and willingness to tackle hard issues and to discuss things openly and from a Christian perspective. And so thank you so much for being on the show today and for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, so we had talked a little bit about the show beforehand that we wanted to talk about mental health topics, which is something near and dear to my heart as a person who suffered with depression and anxiety. So just tell us a little bit about your story and about how you came to be passionate about that topic.
Yeah, so I grew up in a Christian home. My dad was a pastor for a while, and I knew everything there was to know about God, about the Bible. And when I was around 10 years old, my parents ended up getting separated. I ended up being molested by a stranger, and my grandma had passed away. So there was all this trauma in a really short amount of time that I truly didn't know how to deal with, because I'm 10 years old.
To handle for anybody.
Yeah. So by the time I was in middle school, I was really just withdrawn from my friends and the things going on around me. I wasn't really interested in anything. I was spending a lot of time sleeping. My parents actually ended up getting back together, which is an incredible story in itself. Yeah. But for me, there was just, I felt very lost and unable. I didn't have the language to communicate what was going on with me and what I had experienced. And I found out what self-harming was, and I started doing that. And at the end of 8th grade, my parents found out that I was self-harming and said, we got to put you in counseling. So I was in counseling every single week for all 4 years of high school, and I was on maybe about 6 different medications for depression all throughout high school. And that was hard, but it was also like I'm an Enneagram 4, and so there's almost like a deep love for all emotions. And so it was hard because it was something that was really difficult, but it was also something that was like, I don't know how I would live without this part of me if I were to be healed or whatever. Yeah. But out of high school, I ended up doing this missions program. And through that, I was really unconvinced just about the things that people said who God was and what the Bible said about God, because I hadn't experienced that for myself. And then I had just had this radical encounter where I feel like I met the God of the Bible and started to see his characteristics play out in my life. And I remember during that time, it was about a 6-month period, and I spent some time in a different country. And I remember asking God, okay, I want you to use my life. Like I realize you're real. I believe you. I see you. I want you to use my life. And I felt like God said, I'll use your life as long as you're honest. I'll use your story as long as you're honest. And so I went home and I started speaking just about right when I got home. And my mental illness was just a season, like it was over. And I was really excited about that. And I was speaking, and I got engaged to my best friend, and I was traveling the world doing ministry and all these amazing opportunities. And I got offered a job in youth ministry, and I was about 22 years old. So I got married. And one day it was in September before I got married in November, I had a panic attack, and it was super weird because I hadn't really experienced a lot of anxiety. But I knew about it because people always talk about it hand in hand with depression. And,
yeah, they go together.
Yeah. And so I thought, well, maybe this is just like a bad day, an off day, because everything I could ever want in life, I have right now. And the next day came, and it was the same. And then the next day, and it turned into a month. And I knew of a family friend who ended up committing suicide, and that really affected me in kind of perpetuated just these things I was feeling. So I got back on my mental health medication, on meds for depression, and I ended up getting a lot worse, which I later ended up finding out. So I didn't know I was bipolar. And so at the end of, so from September to January, I stopped eating, I stopped sleeping, just barely functioning. I was thinking about death all the time. And I remember just praying to God, like, would you just heal me? Would you just take this away? And that didn't happen. And so I thought, well, there's nothing left for me. I can't operate out of this place. I'm completely empty. The only way I'll ever get better is if I die, if I'm literally with Jesus. And so I went to my office at the church and I told my boss, I said, I'm praying about stepping down. And then I went to go home to commit suicide. And I sat in my office and I couldn't go home. And it wasn't because I was scared. There's just like this thing. Now I know it's the Holy Spirit, but I just couldn't get out of my office. And so I set a timer for 30 minutes, and when it went off, I gathered my stuff. I went to go out the door, and a lady came upstairs and came straight through my door, shut the door, sat down in a chair, and it was one of my best friend's mom. And she looked at me and she said, "Do I need to take you to the hospital?" And I just thought, what the heck? And later she said she was driving home from having coffee with someone. She felt like she needed to pray for me. So she did. And when she prayed for me, she felt like God said, you need to go get her. Wow. And so she took me to the hospital. My husband met me there. I got checked in and I ended up going to a psych ward. And while I was there, my nurse was a Christian, which was like super weird. And then my doctor was also a Christian. It like just all these things started falling into place. And while I was there, I found out that I was bipolar. And the mental health medication, the depression medication I was on was actually causing this months-long episode that I was going through. So that's why it wasn't ending. And so I feel like I can say I've experienced anxiety, I've experienced the depression, and now I know that I'm bipolar. And so I had never really, I'd heard pastors talk about being depressed and being a pastor and being anxious and being a pastor, but I'd never really heard anyone talk about being bipolar. I've just heard the kind of Hollywood extremes. And for me, it was really, really important that I started to live this walk more publicly so that other people who can identify with me feel a sense of hope and not shame with their with their diagnosis, and that they can walk in that too. And so that was when I was 22. I'm 25 now. I've been in ministry for a while now. And I'm so thankful for my mental illness because it's something that has kept me dependent on God the way that nothing else ever has in my life. Right. So
yeah, well, that's an amazing story. Just, I mean, to have God intervene in that moment, that precisely like that, it's like, A, he loves you, and B, he's got some great plan for you. I don't, seems like it would be really hard to doubt that again. I mean, I know that mental illness is a thing, and I've been in that place where I call it poisoned thinking, where my thinking was just not straight. And I look back at, thoughts that I had, and I'm like, man, I was just looking at it all wrong. It's like my husband and I describe it as like, I have the wrong color of glasses on, it just colors the way I perceive everything else. But I too am thankful for doctors and medication. And I had kind of a similar thing. I got on medication, I got better, I got off, then I tanked again, and then I got back on. But I make a point to let people know that, because I think that gives some other people then the freedom to say it's okay to be a Christian and to be depressed or anxious. I always felt like, a Christian's supposed to be joyful and peaceful all the time. And here I am feeling the opposite, what does that say about me? So we can, be in a good spiritual place and still struggle mentally and emotionally. And I agree with you. I think that's a important message to share and to overcome that stigma and everything.
Yeah.
So how did that lead in then to the podcast that you're using now?
So when I was when I was preaching through those few months of working as a youth pastor and dealing with that anxiety, I tried to make a point every week to share some point of honesty with my students and say, like, this is where I'm at right now.
Yeah.
To give them permission to be able to say the same, but also to see, like, I sometimes think that when people are growing up, they think that their spiritual leaders don't have those problems. Mm. And then maybe they panic when they get there and they have those problems. But to just say, no, we all do. And so there was that. And then I ended up the same month that I was diagnosed as bipolar, found out I was pregnant. I also went back to school to get my bachelor's degree in theology and biblical studies. And while I was at school, there were so many things that my professors spoke to that felt like pretty taboo topics, or things that the church just really hasn't maybe doesn't feel equipped to talk about, that felt so important and so just a part of my life. And I think there's that scripture in Isaiah where it talks about how God dwells in eternity, how he takes up eternity because he's so big. And I always thought, if God dwells in eternity, if he takes up that much space, like, surely he takes up space in these little areas that we feel like are off limits to God, or that God doesn't want to see. And so I think the combination of it all, I was like, man, I just wish the church would talk about these things, or I wish our church would do this. And I just felt the conviction of God saying, well, you can talk about them. You have a voice and you have equipment, and you just do it. And so my husband said, yeah, you need to do it. No excuses. And so started asking some friends, hey, this is a really vulnerable topic, but I think you'd be good at sharing. Would you be willing for me to ask you questions and share about it? And I've had some really great friends be really good sports and allow me to ask them some deeply personal questions about deeply personal issues. And we've, I think the podcast has grown such a unique and beautiful community of, I know there are some non-believers who listen, and there are some believers who feel like they're on the fringes that listen. And then there's some maybe very involved believers that listen. And I just feel like there's such a call from God on us to be honest, because that's our testimony, right? And when people hear a testimony that they can identify with, then they get to see what God has done. And that doesn't happen until we're honest. And so these honest conversations are super important to me.
Yeah, that's a great point. Just the importance of the authenticity that we have to others. Let's others see God's glory and his strength in our times of weakness. And I agree with you. I feel like the church or Christians as a whole are kind of, we like to put on the mask of everything's okay, and there's kind of this, I've got to be cheerful or be, on all the time. And I struggled with my depression longer than I needed to, because I wouldn't go get help because of the stigma and the shame. And because I thought, well, I'm a Christian, I'm not supposed to be struggling with this, and all that sort of stuff. And thinking that, people in church would really think I was some kind of hypocrite or something that I did. But part of my stepping out to get help and get recovery was I went to my pastor and his wife, and I'm like, I'm depressed. I'm having doubts about God. I just don't know how to deal with any of this. And they were so sweet and prayed with me and, encouraged me and told me some, she told me some struggles that she had about a similar kind of a topic. And it was so nice to be embraced by the church and by Christian leadership when I felt like I was doing something that was, or I was feeling a way that was against how Christians were supposed to feel. But I think I agree with you. We need to get that message out more so that other people feel free then to step up and say, hey, me too. I've got this going on, because Jesus can help any of those things. He's not there's nothing that he can't touch, like you said. How have you seen that impact other people's lives when you open up with your authentic self? How do people respond to that?
I think the thing that I've appreciated or just found as like a really, I don't know, beautiful honor is that people have felt able to share with me about some of the hard things that they've gone through or some of the big questions that they have. And I think I don't know what it is about it, but there's just something so beautiful, and you get to learn from other people when they say like, this is what I'm struggling with right now, or these are the doubts that I have. And then I mean, some of those conversations have even led to other podcast episodes where I've gone, oh, I didn't even think about that. Like, thank you for sharing, because that's not something I'm super aware of in my life.
Yeah.
And so it's been like, yeah, it's just been really hopeful. I guess just encouraging, and that people would let me in so that I can have a better vision for what to do.
Yeah. I've seen that too, when I take the initiative to say, hey, this is my story. This is what I've struggled with. And then other people feel open to share their thing, and we can talk about it. In my case, I lost my son in the second trimester, and it's, they say statistics, these types of things happen to 1 in 4 women, but we never talk about it, and I really had a hard time finding somebody else that would allow me to open up about that, because it's not really a topic people feel comfortable talking about. They don't know how to respond, and they don't. So I just feel like the more we talk about our stuff, the more that gives other people the freedom to talk about their stuff. And that's helpful when we drag those things out into the light. They kind of diminish some. I think also that we can be, more sensitive to one another that way.
Yeah, I would agree. I think there's so much, I mean, I think about this last election and just like how crazy everything has been, but then just being able to sit down and listen to why people, I don't want to get too political on here, but why people vote a certain way.
Yeah.
Because I think we often are like, that's the wrong way to vote. But then when we hear their story and how maybe this party has represented people who have lives like them and people who look like them, it's much more easy to understand and be like, okay, I think I totally miss that. I totally miss the humanity of this situation.
Yeah. That would be so valuable if we would all do that more often. Unfortunately, it gets reduced down to kind of shouting at each other on Facebook or something. But we just need those richer conversations. And so that's what's beautiful, I think, about your podcast is, maybe people aren't courageous enough to have that conversation in real life, or maybe they don't know somebody with that issue, or don't know somebody who's willing to listen to their issue, but they can listen to the conversations that you're having with your guests and, feel included in a way, part of that, virtually. So I can see how that's really impactful and really helpful to people.
Thank you.
How do you think, how can we do better as in church, as Christians, of just being more authentic, being more real, being willing to address all the things? How would that look like if we did that more often?
I think there's this interesting, like pastor-centric outlook in the Western church, where every Sunday, or maybe you go on Saturday night, whenever you go to church, it's like there's worship, and then the pastor gets up and talk, and then that's kind of it. And I always thought, it'd be so interesting if every single service you had someone else from the congregation share their testimony in like a 3 to 5 minute video at the top of the service, or because it gives us a different perspective. It gives us a different, maybe you go to church where just men speak, so then maybe you get to hear a woman's testimony and how God has looked through her life, or maybe you get to hear someone young, maybe you get to hear someone who grew up in poverty, maybe you get to hear someone who went through addiction. Just there's so many different options, or not even options. There's so many different stories just sitting in your church.
Yeah.
And there really are people who are willing to share. And I think if we did that, and I also think we're able to do that through community and community groups. But I think if we did that, the church would become a lot more self-aware, because I think oftentimes it's like I go in and it's like, okay, what am I going to get from the pastor? And I forget that it's like I'm a part of a body,
right,
and we proclaim the name of Jesus, and we're his hands and feet, which means we have to do stuff and pursue justice and all these things. And I think we forget about it on Sundays. And I think if there was just more open conversations and more invitations for people to share their testimony, we would start to have just a much bigger picture of who the body of Christ really is.
Yeah. I love that, just to get that pretty mosaic of the amazing way that he works in every individual life. Every story is unique. And I think too, this pastor-centric, I like that word. I hadn't thought of that word before, but you're right. And I think too, that puts a lot of burden on those who are in leadership in ministry of they got to do it all themselves, and people show up to be fed or to be entertained or whatever. And kind of there's this idea that the paid staff should do it all.
Yeah.
So I think, sharing that load would be nice. I was a speaker once at a women's retreat, and the pastor's wife had asked different people to give their testimony each time before I spoke. And I was just so amazed at how God worked all that out, that it fit right together. And, we hadn't talked ahead of time. We hadn't coordinated. I didn't know who was speaking, had no idea what their stories were. But each time it just fit right in. And there was one time even, I was kind of looking over my notes beforehand. I'm like, something is missing from this talk. Like I'm missing some big chunk that's important. And I kept praying about it. I'm like, Lord, tell me what it is. And I kind of just felt him say, just go on. It'll be fine. Not really giving me an answer. And I'm like, okay, that doesn't make me feel any better.
Yeah.
But the woman who spoke before me had this, just very passionate story about her relationship with her father and ultimately the forgiveness that she had for him. And I was like, that's the piece that was missing. It was forgiveness. And I just love it how God didn't give me that piece. He gave it to somebody else.
Yeah.
And it took the two of us being willing, being brave to share our stories together. That was just such a powerful lesson to me God doesn't just give the whole enchilada to one person.
Yeah.
He gives us all pieces, and we're supposed to bring them together and share them. So I love that idea.
Yeah.
What other ideas do you have to revolutionize church?
Gosh, I don't. It's such a funky time right now, right?
Because it is. Everything's weird.
COVID. I think my biggest encouragement right now is just to still pursue community, not use virtual church as an excuse to not pursue community. And it's hard. And I mean, some people are so sick of like Zoom, and we have our community group on Zoom, and it's awkward, and it's sometimes it's weird, but I have felt, I think my mom always says, when you're in community, it's a place where you are called to accountability. And especially if you're in, like I'm a speaker, but I'm not on staff at a church. And so, like I really do crave and need accountability in a bigger sense. And I get that from that group, and I get that from other Christian community around me. And go ahead.
Sorry. Well, I was just going to say, small groups in churches or, Bible study clusters or, whatever they're called, just to have that interaction throughout the week, or, that text of I'm thinking of you or pray for me or what have you. When we just meet somebody on Sunday and then we leave, we're disconnected all week, and then we come back next Sunday, you just can't really build that kind of relationship in that venue.
Yeah. And it becomes, I think community groups are also helpful because, at least we work through those questions, like questions about the sermon, and sometimes it can feel cheesy, but I think what that also does is it takes it from like, what can I get from my pastor to like, am I actually living this out? Like, do I actually believe this? What do I think about this? And then I think on another note, something that I love about community within churches is that, you could have like a single guy who's 19 in a community group with a couple who's been married for 55 years. And you're getting all these different perspectives about the sermon, about the biblical text that you wouldn't naturally get. Like, I wouldn't naturally hang out with a couple who'd been married for 55 years. Like, that's not my normal community.
Yeah.
But in church, it is my normal community. And then I think the community group we just joined, they have they have a really cool focus on, we want to go and serve together at some point and like serve regularly together. And I think it just really puts like the Great Commission into practice. Whereas when we're just going into church on Sundays, it's kind of this consumer mindset.
Right, exactly. And I think it's easier to invite someone new to a smaller group is less intimidating. If it's in home or whatever, then, maybe if they're not comfortable in a church, it would be an easier way to introduce a new person. But we were part of a really big church when we lived in the DC area. And so, small groups in a big church are super important. Otherwise you just get lost in a sea of people. But so we had 5 going on 6 kids at the time. And so we joined the group that said they were the 30s, people in their 30s. They were kind of split up by age. So we got in this group and we were there for several months, and great, wonderful people. But we started to realize like none of them had young children, and they were all dealing with aging parents or, kids in college. And we're just like, why are we the only ones with young children? Why are we? And then we realized that the group was the 30s group 20 years ago when they formed it. And they had all aged together, but they never updated the group setting. And so they're like, oh, you need to go to the family builders group. And so we switched groups, and I'm like, oh, here's all the people with kids our age. They had kid friendly things and stuff like that. So I do like what you're saying about the mix, and I have been in those groups too. But in this particular case, finding our right group was kind of an important aspect.
Yeah, it's nice. I think, there's like a couple couples in our group that are our age with kids our age, and then there's a few that are older and more spread out. And I think finding those people that you identify with, that make you comfortable in the group, that you can relate to, are really good. And then finding those people kind of adjacent to you in different life seasons is just as helpful.
It is, because I think we tend to clump together with people who are just like us, and that's not. I don't think that's helpful for. I mean, whether we're Christians or not, or whatever, we hang out with the people with the same political ideas or the same interests, and we really need more of that crosstalk and diversity. I think that would help us understand each other better.
Yes, I fully agree.
So, what going back, to the beginning where we started with, mental health and in the church and all that, can you think back over your journey of like people or a situation that was very helpful to you, something that, where a person reached out, or obviously the lady who came to your office and obeyed that prompting from the Lord. But just as we try to support people among us who are maybe struggling with stuff, do you have some ideas of how best to support people who are in that time of hurting?
Yeah. My first piece of advice is always encourage the pursuing therapy. I think especially if you have kids in your house that are struggling with mental illness, like as a parent, you are not a licensed therapist. And it would be a conflict of interest if you were. So for me, it was someone, when my parents put me in counseling, it was someone that I knew I could have an honest conversation with, that they wouldn't start crying, that they wouldn't freak out about the thoughts that I was dealing with. And that was really, really helpful, that I had that an opportunity to have those conversations every single week. I also think, and this is more of a personal thing, but the more people I've talked to who have gone through depression, anxiety, and people who've been grieving as well, is I don't need people to look for the silver lining for me. I need people who are going to say, this really sucks.
Yeah.
And I'm so sorry this happened.
Mm-hmm.
And I can't imagine going through this. Like,
Mm-hmm.
I don't need a push in, well, the Bible, God knows what he's doing and everything happens. Well, it's like, okay, I know that, but that's not where I'm at right now. And, I do think there are really good biblical examples of that through the Psalms and through just how people grieved in the Old Testament and how communities grieved in the Old Testament. And so I would say it's okay to say to someone who is in that spot, like, this sucks. I'm so sorry. Like, that's not going to be a bummer. At least for me, I've always felt seen when someone says that. And I think when I've had other comments, I know that they've meant well, but I've almost felt looked past rather than seen. So
you can't really receive that kind of silver lining message from somebody until they've kind of validated the pain first, at least.
That's
and I think some people get caught up in that because they don't know what to say. And I understand that, but I don't think we even need words necessarily. You know, sometimes it's just a hug. Or recently I was on an airplane and the woman next to me, like right after they closed the doors and everything's quiet and we're getting ready to pull back, she got a call that her son passed away. He had been in a car accident a couple of days prior, and she was flying across the country to go see him, and she wasn't able to get there before he passed away. And so, I mean, you know, her reaction, you can imagine, it was every bit as dramatic as you would expect someone in that depth of grief to experience in that moment. But I switched seats because my husband was sitting next to her, and I just put my arm around her. We just cried together. You know, there are no words. There's nothing that's going to make her feel better in that moment. And she shouldn't, you know, she needs to process and feel that pain. But so for the next 3 hours, we sat next to each other, and I just let her, you know, she would go from sobbing uncontrollably to looking at his pictures on her phone to telling a funny joke or an off-color story or, you know, then to ranting about politics and I just, you know, it says, the Bible says, weep with those who weep and rejoice with those who rejoice. And so I just followed her lead on her emotions. And the only reason I was equipped to do that is because I've been in that place where I was grieving and people didn't know how to respond. And I'm like, just grieve with me. I love, even with Job, you know, his friends come and they sit down with him for a week. I can't remember how many days. They sit down in silence and then they open up and start doing their preaching at him stuff. But at least in the beginning, they just sat and cried with him.
Yeah. I think I had a miscarriage about 6 weeks ago. And I remember feeling, we decided to just be on, like, tell people about it, post on social media that had happened. We hadn't shared that we were pregnant yet. And just the amount of people who were like, hey, I left something at your door. You don't need to come out. You don't need to come talk to me. I just want you to feel seen. And how seen I felt just from that. And just from, my mom came over like every single day for a week just to be there. And sometimes words don't cut it. And sometimes words make it more messy. And I think there's something so beautiful and honest and healthy for us when we allow ourselves to grieve, and we need to become comfortable with being uncomfortable with the grief.
Right. And just expressing that, and that it's okay, like you said in the Psalms. So what would be your message to the person that was about helping other people? What if the person listening is in that situation, is struggling with mental health, of panic attacks or depression or a diagnosis, or, you know, not getting the medicine quite right? Sometimes it takes a while to get things adjusted. You know, what advice? You already mentioned get therapy. What other things could you encourage that person listening with?
I think recognizing, I think sometimes we want to deny everything, like, oh, I'm not that bad, or like other people have it worse, but recognizing like your life is worth getting help, like you are worth getting help.
Yes.
And that, you know, maybe if your meds aren't quite right, like continuing to have those conversations with your doctor. Maybe if you can't get into therapy, like it is really helpful to go see your physician and just say, like, these are the thoughts and feelings I'm experiencing. And then just creating a community of people around you that know. And again, I'm a huge advocate for allowing your therapist to be your therapist and not putting that on your friends or family. But I'm also a huge advocate for healthy honesty and being able to say, like, hey, I'm not okay, so I do need accountability, that I'll go and see the doctor that I need to see, or that I'll go and talk about the meds I need to talk about. And I've had that with my family and with my mentor, and that's been extremely helpful. And I it's tempting to be like shamed about it, but I think the more I've gotten to know God, and also the more I've realized that, like, my family and my friends love me, and this isn't like, they don't see me as mentally ill. They see me as Brenna, and that I have real struggles just like them, and that it's so worth pursuing. And of course, having children that you are supposed to take care of, like, every day. I'm like, yep, I need to be healthy so I can take care of my son. So
Yep, that was me. It was my children that got me out of bed every day. Otherwise, I would have stayed in bed.
Yep.
But I love what you said. And also it takes courage to just take those steps to go. So having that supportive system around you to, hold you accountable, or to say, hey, you can do this. Especially when you're already in a weakened state, even just getting help can seem like a bridge too far some days. So I really like that you said, to surround yourself with that supportive community. I think that's critical.
Yeah, I remember just when I checked into the hospital that first time, my husband came, my friend's mom was there, and then two of my friends came, and my parents came. And that, like, I think I wanted to be embarrassed, but it was like, everyone was like, you did what you needed to do, and now you're here, and now you're safe, and now you're going to get answers. And I felt so loved that people wanted to come be with me in that place.
Yeah, that is awesome. Well, thank you so much for joining us today. And for those who are listening, please check out more from Brenna at her podcast, Can I Say That? And also, you said you like to post on Instagram. Is that right?
So, I post most of my speaking stuff on Instagram.
Okay. And your handle for that is?
At Bun on My Head.
Yes. And for those watching the video, I'm like, how can you have a bun on your head when your hair is so short? So just tell the listeners why your hair is so short.
Oh, I shaved my head before quarantine.
Great time to do that. So maybe later you'll have an actual bun on your head. But
yes.
Okay, awesome. That makes it easy for people to remember so that they can come find you and listen to more of your wisdom. And thank you so much for your courage to be honest about your story and about the things that you discuss, and encouraging others to be honest. I just think this is so critical for people who are struggling, for people who are trying to help those people, for church people, for our nation right now when we're so divided on so many things. It's just, we need this in so many ways. So thank you for being obedient to God's call on your life. You're a blessing to many.
Thank you so much.
All right. And thank you all for listening to the Resilient Life Hacks podcast today. If you haven't done so already, hop over to iTunes and give us a review and a like. And that helps us to get this message of hope and healing out to even more people. So thank you for tuning in, and we will see you next week.